My name is Jasmine Perry. I'm 30 years old, and I work as a software engineer in San Jose, California. I live in a 4-bedroom house in the suburbs, a house I bought 3 years ago with my own money after grinding for 5 straight years across Silicon Valley, chasing promotions and swallowing stress like it was water. For a while, life here was peaceful. It was just me and my grandfather, Frank Perry, who's 78 now, still strong, sharp-minded, and brutally straightforward. He's a war veteran with that firm, no-nonsense personality that doesn't bend for anyone. He doesn't tolerate excuses. He doesn't tolerate manipulation. And he definitely doesn't tolerate injustice. The bond between Grandpa Frank and me is hard to explain unless you've had someone like him in your corner. He understands me in a way no one else ever has. When I was exhausted, when I doubted myself, when life felt too loud, he was the steady thing. The person who didn't just love me, but respected me. But about a year ago, this house wasn't peaceful. A year ago, my parents and my younger sister Jessica were living here too, rent-free. And that detail matters more than you think. My story begins exactly 1 year ago, on a typical weekday in early July. I was sitting at my desk at work, deep in planning for a new project, when my phone started buzzing. I glanced down and saw Grandpa Frank's name. I answered immediately, smiling without thinking. "Hey, Grandpa." But he didn't say hi back. He cut straight through me in a rushed, anxious voice. "Jasmine." My stomach tightened. Grandpa didn't call me like this unless something was wrong. "I just saw Jessica walk out of your room," he said. She had a watch in her hand. For a second, my brain refused to process the words, like my mind was trying to protect me. Then it hit. A hot, sharp bolt of panic shot through my chest. "Are you sure?" I whispered, even though I already knew Grandpa didn't exaggerate. He didn't think. He didn't assume. He saw. My hands started shaking as I thanked him and hung up. The office around me blurred. The keyboard under my fingers felt suddenly unfamiliar, like I didn't belong in my own life. With trembling hands, I opened my home security app and pulled up the camera footage. Time slowed to something thick and cruel as I rewound it. And then, there it was. Jessica, sneaking into my room like she didn't live under my roof for free, like she had a right to cross my boundaries. I watched her walk straight to the glass cabinet that held my watch collection, my small private trophy case of everything I'd earned. I paused the footage and zoomed in. My throat tightened. The watch she took was my Rolex Submariner date, worth $20,000. The most expensive timepiece I owned. I'd bought it just months earlier to celebrate my promotion. One of those rare moments where I let myself feel proud, where I told myself, "Jasmine, you did it. You actually did it." That watch wasn't just money. It was years of exhaustion. Years of proving myself. Years of being the responsible one in a family that seemed allergic to responsibility. As I stared at the screen, another detail made my stomach sink even lower. That morning, rushing out the door, I had forgotten to lock my bedroom door. I almost never forget, but that single careless moment had opened the door for her. I sat frozen in my office chair, watching Jessica on loop, like it was some kind of nightmare clip I couldn't stop replaying. And still, some stupid part of me tried to save her. Maybe she's borrowing it. Maybe she just wanted to look at it. Maybe she'll put it back before I get home. The denial was humiliating, but it was real. Because admitting the truth meant admitting something worse than theft. It meant admitting betrayal. I even thought about calling the police right then, sitting in my office in broad daylight like a woman about to blow her whole life apart. But I looked at the clock. 2 hours left in the workday. I decided to wait. Because at that moment, I still wanted to believe my sister had enough conscience left to return it. I tried to focus on my tasks, but my mind kept spiraling, racing through every memory of Jessica standing in my doorway, watching me, asking questions she shouldn't care about. "What's the most expensive one? How much is that one worth? Do you ever worry someone will steal them?" At the time, I thought she was just being curious, maybe even impressed. Now those memories felt like warning signs I'd ignored. At exactly 5:00 p.m., I packed up my desk and bolted out of the office like I was running from a fire. The entire drive home, my heart pounded, not just from fear, but from this tiny, desperate hope that I'd open my cabinet and find the Rolex sitting there like nothing happened. Like I'd imagined it, like I'd been paranoid. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked too still, too normal, like it didn't know my world had cracked in half. Inside, it was just Grandpa Frank and me. My parents and Jessica weren't back yet, and the silence felt wrong, like the house was holding its breath. Grandpa stood in the living room, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, focused, almost disappointed. He didn't ask how my day was. He didn't offer comfort. He just nodded toward the stairs as if to say, "Go see for yourself." I rushed upstairs, my legs heavy, my hands cold. In my room, the glass cabinet waited. I opened it with trembling fingers. And there it was. The empty slot. The cold, brutal truth. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might choke. Anger surged first, hot and violent. Then something deeper crept in underneath it. Disappointment. Not just in Jessica. In my parents, too. Because even before they walked through the door, I already knew what would happen next. I knew the script. Jessica would deny. My parents would defend. And somehow, I would be the villain for wanting my own life respected. I stared at that empty space and remembered every time Jessica stood there, lingering too long, her eyes fixed on the Rolex like it was already hers. I'd warned her more than once. "Don't touch anything in my room, Jess, especially the watches." She'd always laughed it off. "Oh my God, Jasmine, relax, you act like I'm a criminal." But now, here I was, staring at proof that she didn't just want what I had. She felt entitled to it. And honestly, I wasn't surprised. Because Jessica had been spoiled her entire life, protected, forgiven, and never truly held accountable for anything. And my parents had been the architects of that disaster. To understand how this all unfolded, you need to know my family. My father, Paul Perry, is 55. He's worked in insurance for over 30 years. He's always stressed about money, but he also has this bad habit of living beyond his means, spending more than he earns, and acting like tomorrow will magically fix it. My mother, Kelsey Perry, is 53, and she works part-time at a small neighborhood bookstore. She's gentle by nature, soft, emotional, the kind of woman who cries when commercials get too sad. And then there's Jessica, my younger sister. She was 22 at the time, a college senior about to graduate. She had this obsession with luxury. Anything expensive, anything shiny, anything that could make her look like she belonged to a life she didn't earn. In 2023, my parents lost all their savings after a failed investment with a friend. They were forced to sell the house Grandpa had given them years ago to pay off their debts. When that house was gone, they had nowhere to go. They came to me desperate. At first, I refused, flat out. I knew my family. I knew what moving them in would do to my peace. But then they played the one card that always worked on me. Grandpa Frank. He'd been living with them at the time, and the idea of him suffering, being dragged through their mess, broke something in me. So I agreed. Rent-free. I told myself it would be temporary. At first, things were okay. We shared space, shared chores, and I tried to keep the peace. But the cracks showed fast. Jessica started asking me for money. Textbooks, tuition, emergencies, personal expenses. I helped at first because I wanted to be a good sister. But she never paid me back. And every time I brought it up, she dodged the conversation like it was a game. If I complained, my parents snapped into defense mode. Family needs to understand each other. They said it like a prayer, like repeating it enough times would make boundaries immoral. Then Jessica started borrowing my belongings. First my laptop, then my headphones, then other things I couldn't even keep track of. Every time I caught her, she had a smooth excuse and an easy promise. "I'll give it back." She never did. A month before the watch incident, Jessica entered my room and saw the watch collection in the glass case. Her eyes lit up in a way that made my skin prickle. She kept asking the value of each one, especially the Rolex. After that, something in me shifted, like my body recognized danger before my heart wanted to admit it. So I installed a tiny hidden camera pointed directly at the cabinet. I never imagined that little camera would become the most important piece of evidence in my life. Downstairs, Grandpa Frank was still waiting in the living room when I came back out. He didn't ask. He just looked at me, and in that look was a quiet message. "Now you know." The front door finally opened around 6 o'clock p.m. My parents walked in first, faces neutral, tired. Then Jessica followed, timing it perfectly, like she didn't want to be alone with me for even 1 second. The three of them paused when they saw me and Grandpa sitting there, serious, waiting. Usually, at this hour, I'd be showering or in my room. This time I didn't move. I looked at them and said calmly, "Sit down, all of you. We need to talk." And for the first time since I bought that house, it didn't feel like my home. It felt like a courtroom, and I was about to put my own sister on trial. The second they sat down, I felt it. That invisible shift in the air, like the house itself had decided to stop breathing. My parents took the couch together, close enough to look united, like this was a problem they could solve with family talk and a few soft words. Jessica dropped into the far corner, arms folded tight, chin tilted up just slightly. Defensive before I even said a word. Grandpa Frank didn't sit on the couch. He stayed in his armchair, the one by the window. His posture was calm, but his gaze was sharp, like a judge who'd already read the entire case file. I stood in front of them, hands at my sides, trying to keep my voice steady. It wasn't easy, because my anger wasn't loud yet. It was cold, the kind of anger that makes you feel like you could shatter something with a whisper. I looked at each of them in the eye, one by one. Then I said, "My Rolex went missing today. Does anyone know anything about it?" Jessica's reaction came instantly, too fast to be real. Her eyes widened dramatically, mouth falling open like she was auditioning for a role. "What? Jasmine, I have no idea what you're talking about," she gasped. "Maybe you misplaced it." And there it was. Not concern, not confusion, a convenient explanation prepared in advance. My mother leaned forward, hands clasped like she was praying. "Sweetheart, are you sure it's missing?" she asked softly. "Maybe you forgot where you put it. You've been working so hard lately." My father chimed in with a calm tone that would have sounded reasonable if I didn't know him. "Could it be at the office?" he offered. "You might have left it there." All three of them were talking like this was an unfortunate accident. Like I was being dramatic. Like my watch had simply evaporated. I didn't answer right away. I just stared at Jessica. Because if you've known someone your whole life, you learn the difference between their face and the mask they wear. And right then, Jessica was wearing a mask. I asked again, slower. "Jessica, are you sure you don't know anything?" Her face hardened. The fake shock slipped for half a second. Then she replaced it with offense. "Why would you even accuse me?" she snapped. "I would never take your stuff." My father's head lifted sharply. "Jasmine," he said, warning in his voice. "You're accusing Jessica? That's ridiculous." That word, ridiculous, hit me like a slap. Because this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was theft. And they were already trying to bury it under family loyalty. I swallowed. My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't panic. It was the effort of holding myself together. I pulled my phone out slowly. Grandpa's eyes flickered toward it, then back to their faces, like he already knew what was about to happen, and was waiting to see who would still lie. I opened the security camera app. The room went silent in the way it goes silent right before a car crash. I looked directly at Jessica. My voice came out calm but sharp. "Then explain this." I turned the screen toward them and hit play. The footage started. Jessica on screen, creeping down the hallway, glancing around like a thief who knows exactly what she is. She slipped into my room, walked straight to the glass cabinet, opened it, reached in, and took the Rolex. Clear as day, no blur, no doubt. For a split second, Jessica's face drained of color. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's lips parted, but no sound came out. And I thought, just for one stupid second, I thought the truth would finally do what it was supposed to do. I thought it would stop the lies. I thought it would force accountability. But Jessica didn't crumble. She doubled down. "I was just getting something else," she stammered, voice shaky, but still trying. I didn't steal it." I rewound the footage and scrubbed forward slowly, like I was teaching a child how to read. There she was again, opening the glass door. There she was again, reaching specifically for the Rolex. Not a random watch. Not a cheap one. The most expensive piece in that entire case. I paused the screen on the exact moment her fingers wrapped around it. My voice went ice cold. "Interesting," I said quietly. "So you accidentally took the most valuable watch I own?" Jessica's eyes flashed with anger. But before she could answer, my parents moved like they'd practiced this for years. My mother leaned forward, voice pleading. "Jasmine, honey, maybe she just wanted to borrow it. She didn't mean to steal." My father nodded quickly, relief in his tone as if he'd found the magic excuse. "Exactly. This is a family matter," he said. "Do we really need to blow it out of proportion?" Something inside me snapped. Not a scream, not a tantrum, a clean break. Because that wasn't concern for me. That wasn't disappointment in her. That was damage control. For Jessica. Always for Jessica. I stepped closer, phone still in my hand. "Borrowing without asking," I said, voice rising, "is stealing. Sneaking into my room and taking my property is stealing." Jessica's eyes filled instantly with tears so sudden they looked fake, like she'd flipped a switch. "I was only going to borrow it for a few days," she cried. "I didn't mean anything bad." And like clockwork, my parents rushed to her, my mother rubbing her back, my father glaring at me, as if I'd just attacked her. My father's voice hardened. "See? She just wanted to borrow it," he said. "Stop making this a big deal." Stop. Like I was the problem. Like my boundaries were the inconvenience. Like the watch was a toy. I turned my gaze to Grandpa Frank. He hadn't moved, but his hands gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles looked pale. He was furious, and Grandpa was never the kind of man to show anger with noise. His anger lived in stillness. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, but every word carried weight, like a hammer being set down. 22 years old, he said, and she still doesn't know right from wrong. The sentence slammed into the room. My mother froze. My father's jaw clenched. Jessica's crying faltered for half a heartbeat, and for the first time, I felt something shift. Not in Jessica, not in my parents, but in me. Because hearing Grandpa say it out loud made it real in a way my own thoughts hadn't been able to. This wasn't a small mistake. This was who she'd become. I took a breath so deep it hurt. Then I looked straight at Jessica. "Give the watch back," I said, "and I'll let this go." That was my final mercy. My last offer before the world changed. Jessica wiped her eyes, then lifted her chin again. And when she spoke, her voice wasn't remorseful. It was defiant. "I told you," she snapped. "I was going to return it after a few days." That was it. The last thread of patience inside me broke clean. I felt my voice drop into something final. "Give it back now," I said, loud enough to make the room still, "or I'm calling the police." The words landed like a bomb. My mother gasped. My father's eyes widened, like I'd just threatened to burn the house down. Jessica stopped crying completely. For the first time, she looked uncertain. But my parents recovered quickly, because guilt was their favorite weapon. My father leaned forward, voice turning stern, almost scolding. "Jasmine, don't blow this out of proportion. She was going to borrow it for a few days." My mother nodded rapidly, tears gathering like she was about to perform her own scene. "Family is supposed to support one another," she said, trembling. Not take each other to court." Jessica's lips curled as she saw them backing her again. "It's just a watch," she said, voice rising. "Do you have to make such a big scene?" My father seized that opening. "In a family, it's normal to share things," he said firmly. "What you're doing is tearing this family apart. Tearing the family apart. Not the theft. Not the lies. Not the entitlement. Me, for daring to demand what belonged to me." I stood there, surrounded by their voices, and it felt like being bitten by a swarm of fire ants. They were trying to paint me as cruel, heartless, selfish. And the worst part? They truly believed it. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe they just needed to believe it, because it was easier than facing what they'd created. While they kept talking, I noticed Grandpa Frank. He hadn't spoken again, but his gaze had turned dangerous. Not wild, not unstable. Worse, controlled. His eyes moved over my parents and Jessica like he was measuring something. Like he was taking inventory of their excuses, their lies, their cowardice. His jaw clenched once. Then, without a word, he stood up. Slow, deliberate. The argument kept going for a second because my parents didn't even realize he'd moved. But I saw him. I watched him walk out of the living room, heading straight toward the back door. Toward the yard. Toward the small storage shed at the end. A strange dread rose in my chest. Not because I thought Grandpa would hurt anyone, but because I knew that when Grandpa decided something was wrong, he didn't lecture, he corrected. Behind me, my parents were still talking, still trying to guilt me back into submission. But my eyes stayed on the back door, because I could feel it in my bones. Something was about to happen. Something that would make all their excuses crumble into ash. And 5 minutes later, heavy footsteps echoed from outside. The voices in the living room died instantly. We all turned, and Grandpa Frank walked back in. In his hand was a red gasoline can. For a moment, no one spoke. The red gasoline can in Grandpa Frank's hand looked wrong in the living room. Too loud, too final. Like it didn't belong to a place where people still pretended this was just a family misunderstanding. He didn't explain himself. He didn't look at any of us. He simply turned and walked back out the door. And something primal in all of us told us to follow. We moved like we were being pulled by gravity rather than choice. Outside, the early evening air was heavy and warm. The driveway lights flickered on automatically, illuminating the two cars parked side by side, my parents' silver Toyota Camry and Jessica's red Honda Civic. Grandpa stopped between them. Then he opened the gas can. The sharp, chemical smell of gasoline exploded into the air as he began pouring it over the Camry, slowly, methodically, from hood to windshield to trunk. Not a single drop wasted. My mother screamed, "Dad, what are you doing? Please stop." Grandpa didn't flinch. He moved to Jessica's Civic next, dousing it the same way, his movements terrifyingly calm, like he was watering plants instead of preparing something to burn. "Grandpa, please," Jessica cried, her voice breaking. "That's my car. I need it for school." My father rushed forward instinctively. "Dad, please, we can talk this out." That's when Grandpa stopped. He turned slowly, gasoline dripping from the edge of the can, his eyes locking onto my father's. The silence was suffocating. Then Grandpa spoke, his voice steady as steel. "In this family," he said, "sharing each other's things is normal, right? The words hit harder than any shout ever could, because they were my father's words. The same excuse he'd used minutes earlier to justify Jessica stealing from me. No one answered. No one breathed. Grandpa nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. Then these 2 cars are mine now, he continued, and I can use them however I want. My stomach dropped. Slowly, deliberately, Grandpa reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a lighter. That was the moment panic truly set in. My mother collapsed into hysterics. "Frank, please, don't do this." Jessica sobbed uncontrollably, clinging to my father's arm. My father's voice cracked as he begged, "Dad, we were wrong. I'm sorry, please." Grandpa didn't respond. He just raised the lighter slightly, his thumb hovering over the spark wheel. Time seemed to stretch thin, like it might snap. Then Grandpa shouted, sharp, loud, commanding, "Get on your knees." The order stunned them. My father froze, staring at Grandpa as if he hadn't heard correctly. Grandpa repeated it louder. "I said, get on your knees." The authority in his voice cut through everything. My father, Paul Perry, the man who always saw himself as the head of the household, dropped to his knees on the cold concrete. His hands trembled violently. "I'm sorry, Dad," he whispered. "I know I was wrong." Jessica remained standing, paralyzed, tears streaming down her face. Grandpa turned his gaze to her. "Not kneeling?" he said coldly. "Fine, then say goodbye to your car." He moved the lighter closer. Jessica let out a strangled sob and collapsed beside my father, her entire body shaking. I'm sorry, she cried. My mother stood several steps back, sobbing silently, too afraid to move closer. She knew better than anyone that Grandpa had crossed into a place where empty words meant nothing. The air reeked of gasoline and fear. Grandpa looked down at my father, kneeling in the dirt, and asked calmly, "Paul, do you even know how to raise a child?" My father couldn't meet his gaze. In a broken voice, he said, "I failed, Dad. I didn't raise Jessica the right way." Grandpa nodded once. "Then tell your daughter to return the watch," he ordered, "and apologize." My father turned to Jessica, desperation flooding his face. "Give the watch back," he said urgently, "and apologize. No more excuses." Jessica sniffed hard, wiping her face, but even then, even on her knees, soaked in fear, she still couldn't fully admit it. "It's just a watch," she muttered weakly. "Does it really have to be this serious?" I felt something snap inside Grandpa. His face flushed red with fury. "What?" he roared. "You're still arguing? Even now you don't know you're wrong?" His hand twitched toward the lighter. My father nearly screamed. "Jessica, apologize. Stop talking." But Jessica shook her head, stubborn even in terror. "I didn't steal it," she said shakily. "I was borrowing it. I was going to give it back." Grandpa's hand shook, not from fear, but rage. 22 years old, he said coldly, and you still can't tell right from wrong. Then he looked straight at her. "Someone like you doesn't deserve to live in this house." Jessica sobbed harder, but even then, she lashed out. "You're just taking Jasmine's side. You're not being fair." Grandpa raised the lighter again, and just as his thumb moved, a police siren pierced the air. Sharp, sudden. Everyone froze. The sound grew louder as a patrol car slowed down in front of the house. Red and blue lights flashed against the gasoline-soaked driveway. 2 officers stepped out, hands near their radios, eyes immediately drawn to the puddles of fuel, the lighter, and my family kneeling in terror. The older officer spoke sharply. "Sir, put the lighter on the ground. Now." Without protest, Grandpa bent down and placed the lighter carefully on the concrete. The tension cracked, but it didn't disappear. One of the officers turned to us. "Can someone explain what's going on here?" My parents looked at me with pleading eyes. Jessica was shaking too hard to speak. I stepped forward. "My sister stole my $20,000 Rolex," I said clearly. "I have security footage as proof." The officer turned to Jessica. "Is that true, ma'am?" Through tears, she nodded weakly. "I was just borrowing it." The officer shook his head. "Taking property without permission is theft," he said calmly. "At that value, it's a felony." Then Grandpa spoke again, his voice calm, unshakable. "Jasmine," he said, "let her go to jail. Let her learn." The words hit my family like a death sentence. The officer turned to me. "Ma'am, do you want to file an official report?" My parents stared at me like my answer would decide their fate. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a watch anymore. It was about whether the truth mattered. The question hung in the air like a blade. "Do you want to file an official report?" For a split second, no one breathed. My mother was the first to react. She lurched toward me, grabbing my arm with trembling hands, her eyes swollen and red. "Jasmine, please," she begged. "Don't do this. She's your sister." My father followed, his voice breaking in a way I'd never heard before. "Think about her future," he said urgently. One mistake shouldn't ruin her whole life. Jessica looked up at me from the driveway, her knees still pressed into the concrete, fear and anger twisting together on her face. "You can't do this to me," she snapped. "You're my sister." That word, sister, was supposed to be a shield, but all it did was remind me how many times I'd been treated like I didn't matter. I looked at the officers. Then I nodded. "Yes," I said clearly. "I want to file an official theft report." My words dropped like a verdict. My mother let out a sound somewhere between a sob and a scream. My father staggered back like I'd physically struck him. Jessica's face collapsed. "No, no, wait," she cried. "I'll give it back. Just give me a week. I'm sorry. I mean it this time." But it was too late. The older officer gave a professional nod and turned to his partner. "All right, we'll proceed." Grandpa Frank stood beside me, silent but solid. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, almost satisfied. "That's right," he said. "Let her learn what fear feels like. Thieves don't walk away without consequences." As the officers began documenting everything, I showed them the footage on my phone. They watched in silence, rewinding it once, then again. Clear, deliberate, undeniable. When they finished, the younger officer stepped toward Jessica with handcuffs in hand. "Jessica Perry," he said firmly, "you are under arrest for felony theft." The metallic click of the cuffs closing around her wrists echoed louder than any scream. Jessica broke down completely. "Jasmine, please," she sobbed. "Please don't let them take me." My parents rushed forward, but the officers stopped them gently but firmly. My mother collapsed onto the driveway, wailing. My father chased after the police car as they led Jessica away, shouting, "Please, she's just a kid. Give her another chance." One officer turned back calmly. "Theft over $5,000 is a felony under California law," he explained. "She could face 1 to 3 years." My mother crumpled like she'd been unplugged from the world. As the cruiser pulled away, my father turned on me, his face twisted with rage. "Are you happy now?" he shouted. "You destroyed this family." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Grandpa Frank stepped forward instead. "Jasmine didn't destroy this family," he said coldly. "Jessica did. She made her choice." Silence followed. Heavy. Final. I took a breath, steadying myself, and then said the words that would seal everything. "After what happened today," I said firmly, "you both need to leave this house. You have 30 days. My parents stared at me like they couldn't comprehend what they were hearing. "You're kicking us out?" my father shouted. "Have you lost your conscience?" "You've lived here rent-free for a year," I replied evenly, "and instead of being grateful, you defended theft and tried to make me the villain. I can't live like this anymore." My mother dropped to her knees, crying, begging. But I didn't waver. Neither did Grandpa. He stood beside me like a pillar, silent, unmovable. And in that moment, I knew there was no going back. The family I thought I had was already gone. All that was left was the truth. And it was finally standing in the open. The 30 days that followed felt longer than the entire year before it. The house didn't explode into screaming matches or dramatic confrontations. It became something worse. Quiet. A thick, suffocating quiet that pressed down on every hallway, every shared space, every accidental glance. My parents stopped arguing the moment they realized I wasn't bluffing. The entitlement vanished overnight. They moved through the house like guests who had overstayed their welcome. Soft footsteps, lowered voices, eyes always down. It was unsettling how fast they changed once consequences became real. My mother started cooking elaborate meals again. Grandpa's favorites, soups that took hours, dishes she hadn't made in years. She'd place the plate in front of him carefully, like an offering. "Eat while it's warm," she'd say softly. Grandpa would thank her politely, then eat in silence. My father tried a different approach. He began asking about Grandpa's health, making awkward small talk in the mornings, fumbling through conversations like a man who no longer knew his place in the world. "How's your knee today, Dad? Sleeping okay?" Grandpa answered briefly, calm, distant. At one point, he said flatly, "Now you remember respect, now that you're being told to leave." That single sentence ended all attempts. As for Jessica, she was released on bail under my parents' responsibility about a week later. They scraped together enough money to rent her a tiny, rundown room across town while she waited for trial. I never saw her again during those 30 days. I didn't want to. A lawyer made it very clear to my parents, with security footage that clean, Jessica had almost no chance of avoiding conviction. That truth seemed to age them overnight. Their shoulders slumped. Their voices grew quieter. They stopped looking me in the eye completely. And me? I felt something I didn't expect. Relief. Not happiness, not satisfaction. Relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't bending myself into knots trying to keep the peace. I wasn't apologizing for having boundaries. I wasn't being told I was too cold or too harsh for expecting basic respect. Still, relief didn't mean it didn't hurt. There were nights I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying childhood memories that no longer fit the present, wondering how people you grow up loving can turn into strangers so easily. During that time, my boyfriend Ethan became my quiet anchor. He didn't pressure me, didn't give dramatic speeches. He just showed up. He brought dinner when I forgot to eat, sat beside me on the couch when the house felt too heavy, let me talk when I needed to, and let me stay silent when I didn't. Once, while we were sitting on the back porch late at night, he asked gently, "Do you regret it?" I thought about it for a long time before answering. "No," I said finally. "I regret that it had to happen, but not that I stood my ground." He nodded, like that was the answer he hoped I'd give. A few days later, something strange happened. I ran into Sienna, Ethan's ex-girlfriend, at a cafe near my office. The encounter was brief, polite on the surface, sharp underneath. She smiled a little too knowingly. "Things must be intense at home," she said lightly. "People talk." I smiled back, calm. "Let them," I replied. As she walked away, I realized something important. This chaos, this exposure of truth, it was uncomfortable because it stripped away illusions, not just in my family, but everywhere. And I was done pretending. One quiet evening near the end of the 30 days, Grandpa and I sat on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills. The house behind us was nearly empty already. He didn't speak for a long time. Then he placed a firm, warm hand on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you, Jasmine," he said. The words hit me harder than any shout ever could. My throat tightened. I nodded, afraid if I spoke, I'd break. The 30th day arrived faster than I expected. Boxes lined the hallway. The sound of tape ripping and drawers closing echoed through the house. My parents worked silently. My mother paused in the doorway of the room she'd slept in for the past year. Her shoulders shook as she cried quietly, staring at the empty space. I felt a strange mix of sadness and release. Not regret, just acceptance. When the moving truck finally drove away, the house fell silent again. But this time, it was different. "Lighter." Grandpa exhaled slowly. "At last," he said, "this house is peaceful again." And for the first time since everything began, I believed him. 2 months after Jessica's arrest, the trial took place at the Santa Clara County Courthouse. I didn't want to go, not because I was afraid, but because I already knew the truth would hurt everyone who heard it out loud. But Grandpa Frank insisted. "Justice isn't something you hide from," he said. "You witness it." So we went together. The courtroom was cold and sterile, the kind of place where emotions feel out of place, even when they're tearing people apart inside. My parents sat a few rows ahead of us. They looked smaller somehow, older, like the weight of their choices had finally settled into their bones. Jessica sat at the defense table. She wouldn't look at me. Her lawyer did what he could. "Your Honor," he said, standing confidently, "the defendant is only 22 years old. This was a youthful mistake, an impulsive act that should not define the rest of her life." I listened quietly. Then the prosecutor stood. She played the footage. Clear, calculated, undeniable. She spoke calmly, precisely. "This was not a momentary lapse in judgment," she said. "The defendant waited until no one was home, entered a private room, and took the most valuable item in the residence. She knew its worth. She concealed her actions, and she lied when confronted." The judge turned to Jessica. "If you were borrowing the watch," he asked evenly, "why didn't you ask your sister for permission?" Silence. Jessica stared at the table. Then the judge asked the question no one wanted answered. "What did you do with the watch?" Her voice was barely audible. "I sold it." A ripple went through the courtroom. "How much did you receive?" $12,000. "And what did you use it for?" She swallowed. "Credit card debt, and friends I owed money to." After a long pause, the judge delivered the ruling. "Jessica Perry," he said, "this court sentences you to 18 months in jail for felony grand theft. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $20,000 to Jasmine Perry, as well as $3,000 in court costs." My mother cried openly. My father put his head in his hands. Jessica finally looked up, right at me. But there was nothing left to say. Grandpa leaned towards me and whispered, "That's how people learn." And for the first time since all of this began, I felt calm. A year has passed since the Rolex incident. Grandpa and I still live in the same house. Mornings are quiet, peaceful. He tends the garden, reads the paper. We talk every evening, and I value his wisdom more with each passing day. At work, I was promoted to senior software engineer. My life is stable now, emotionally and professionally. Ethan is still by my side, stronger, steadier. He never tried to fix me, he just stood with me. As for my parents, we speak occasionally, polite, distant. The closeness we once had is gone, and it's never coming back. Jessica is still serving her sentence. I haven't visited. I don't plan to. I'm not telling this story to seek sympathy, and I'm not telling it to shame my family. I'm telling it because I learned something important. Real love doesn't mean excusing every mistake. Sometimes real love means setting boundaries and letting people face the consequences of their actions. Family isn't just defined by blood. Family is defined by respect. So I'll leave you with this question. What would you have done if your sister stole something that mattered deeply to you? Would you stay silent because she's family? Or stand up for yourself no matter the cost? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share.